Welcome into a special episode of Canadian Basketball Weekly here on the Maple Minute. It's still episode 7, but it's a special one. We're going to classify as a special episode. As always, I'm your host, Elliot Russenholt. We're going to be looking not at NBA things today, not NCAA stuff today. In terms of Canadians, obviously, there are Canadians doing well everywhere. You know, you can shout out Shai Gilgeous-Alexander and Zach Edey. You can even shout out, I believe there is a Canadian player for just first person that comes on the top of my head for the university, Brown University, I should say, of the Ivy League. And yeah, just a bunch of good things happening here to players, Canadian basketball players, but we're not here to talk about NCAA stuff. That's not what I have on the script. That's why that might have been a little bit off the cuff. We're not talking about NCAA stuff. We're not talking about NBA, Canadians in the NBA today. We're doing all special this week. My home province stuff. It's time for 4A basketball provincials. So we're going to get going and looking at the bracket on that. So we'll get into that first. And then later we're going to talk U Sports recap from the last little while. Obviously, there was conference playoffs. Teams got berths to nationals at the University of Laval. So should be a good one here today to recap all of that. And yeah, we're gonna get right into it here. So gonna bring it up right away here. Just actually before I do that, I do want to shout out obviously MB Senior Boys Basketball on Twitter for making this bracket. And yeah, just so that you're aware, if you don't know, if you're not in the Manitoba basketball scene, the 4A tier is essentially broken up into 3 different conferences: Winnipeg 1, SCAC, and KPAC. So shout out to the Winnipeg 1 conference champs, the Vincent Massey Trojans. They won their matchup. I believe it was against the St. Paul's Crusaders. The Dakota Lancers won the SCAC over JH Bruns. And then the KPAC champs, it was the Kildonan East Reavers over the Garden City Gophers. So congrats to the Reavers. And so with that being said, this week starting, as you'll see here on the bracket, again, shout out MP Senior Boys Basketball on Twitter. March 7th, SCAC and Dakota Collegiate are hosting provincials. Glen Lunel actually is only hosting 1 game. Or excuse me, as I see it, it's 2 games. And you can't see it there, and we'll get to it in a moment. I am blocking just for this first bit. But we'll get into it here again in a moment. Just here's the bracket. The top 4 seeds obviously get buys. So Massey, having been ranked number 1 for essentially most of this year, obviously they've only lost twice. These, again, shout out MB Senior Boys. That is their total record, I believe, against all opponents. I believe it's all Manitoban opponents. If you want to go to his Twitter, he's got a huge spreadsheet where he breaks down each team's wins and losses against specific competition from all different levels as they've played 4A games, 3A games, 2A, any games outside of Manitoba, what their record is. I believe that is Vincent Massey's record, because I believe their only loss in province this year is to Dakota at the Brandon Sun Invitational at the beginning of the season. But yeah, so here's the bracket. Obviously, as I mentioned, Vincent Massey's the 1 seed. Dakota gets the 2 seed as their only loss. Well, they've got 2 losses, one of them to DMCI in the FRC Centurion Shootout, and Massey, which those are their 2 in-province losses. I believe they do count the Brit final loss as well. I believe Manitoba Senior Boys did do that. Yeah, Kildonan East, because they won KPAC, jumps all the way up to the 3rd seed, so they now get a bye, and Garden City, for getting to the final and having a pretty solid season, get the 4 seed. The St. Paul's Crusaders get the 5th seed and the Brandon / out of town 12 seed slot, just because that is normally where they slot in whoever won. I can't remember what the name of the conference is, but it's the Crocus Plains, Vincent Massey, Brandon, Neelan, conference spot. They normally do get the 12, which sucks because I think some years they've been better than some of the other teams. But that 12 spot is always for whoever wins the Brandon School Division slot. The 7-10, I was interested to see this matchup. This will be the 2:00, the first matchup that's happening at Dakota. It'll be the first game of provincials. The Sisler Spartans, the 7 seed, will take on the Maples Marauders, the 10 seed. I'm surprised Maples stayed at 10 and didn't get moved into the 11 play-in spot or not. But that second matchup, obviously, should be an interesting one. There's a couple players on Sisler that I'm really keen to watch, and I think that Maple seems a little bit underrated as much as they've been towards the bottom of that top 10 rankings throughout the year. The most fun matchup, and it'll be the final game on March 7th at 8 p.m. The Miles Mac Buckeyes versus the Daniel Mac Maroons. That's two teams that have dominated some games, then been dominated other games. They've got crazy offenses. I can't speak. But both teams put up a lot of points. It should be an offensive game. It's going to be so much fun to watch. And then the last one I want to recap, which is the 6-11. I know you can't see it underneath me there, but that 11 seed is empty. That is for the play-in game. I do believe, I can't remember who that play-in game would be. I haven't been able to find out who it is, but I am just going to pull it up here for a moment here. Who got the wild cards and who came in as proper conference winners. Obviously, as I had mentioned, Vincent Massey, obviously for zone 1/3, got a proper spot. The Crocus Plains for zone 15 being the winner there. Kildone in the East, obviously being the KPAC winners, Dakota being the SCAC winners, and as well, St. Paul's also being the 5 seed did not get a wild card spot. So everybody else that I did not mention, Garden City being the 4, surprisingly got a wild card. But yeah, I'm not too sure who the wild card game is. I would like to know that because it would be interesting to see who Oak Park has to play. As you can see, Oak Park is one of the teams that did not play as many games. They didn't participate in too many tournaments this year, and they weren't really too active. But this should be really interesting. Obviously, the SCAC is hosting all the games up until the Final Four, and then the University of Manitoba will have the Final Four and championship game. Just dissecting matchups if you want predictions. Obviously, I think that if we start from the top of the bracket, I as much as I think this matchup's going to be really fun, I'm still going to take the Miles Mac Buckeyes. I think they're underseeded, to be quite honest, at the 8 seed there. I think they're a little bit underseeded. I think they could have been maybe the 6 for Oak Park or whatnot, but it is what it is. So I think they do beat the Maroons. I think that's going to be a really good game, as I've said multiple times. I think it's just going to be interesting to see how the game shakes out. Obviously, I'm going to pick St. Paul's to win over Crocus Plains. St. Paul's has been a good team this year, as much as this hasn't been their best season per se. It's still been a pretty good year this year for them. But yeah. Oh, so here it is. So I have, and this should be another interesting game. We'll get to when we get to Oak Park, and that'll decide my pick. So Sisler versus Maples. I'm going to take the Spartans. They've been an underrated team all year. I really love the play that they get from Lance Mangarin. David Sharma is one of my favorite grade 11s, as Mangarin is a senior this year. One of the best juniors in the province, David Sharma. He's fantastic. An absolute bucket getter. I think Maples is in tough there in that first game. So Oak Park the Raiders are obviously playing the wild card game. I do actually have who this will be. So this is actually, as I'm recording, this game actually will have already happened, but I do not have a score for you yet. So hopefully maybe editing Josh can add it in if I can let them know what it is. The game is between the J.H. Brunn's Broncos, who came second in SCAC and actually had a pretty strong year this year. They are 16-5. They actually had a pretty decent season this year. They beat a couple teams. They were second in SCAC play behind the Lancers. And then the TCI and Transcona Collegiate TCI is the other team that's vying for that 11 seed. I do actually think TCI, who's actually they've beaten Miles Mack. They were competitive in K-Pac this year. They really surprised me. I do believe they only lost to Miles Mack in the Husky Invitational Tournament. So that was a tournament hosted by Sturgeon Heights. They only lost to the Buckeyes by 3, I believe. So the Titans actually have a chance, I think, in this game against the Broncos. I am going to take the Broncos, though, in that matchup because I think that the Broncos are the better team. They also are a younger team, so they will be coming back around next year. They've got a couple sophomores on their roster. They've got a bunch of grade 11 contributors. I believe they only have 1 or 2 grade 12 contributors. So they're going to be a really good young team. So I'm going to take the Broncos, and I think either way, I think the Raiders actually beat out whoever is in that 11 game. Going to speed through it now. Massey beats Miles Mack. I think Garden City beats St. Paul's. I think Dakota should take care of Sisler. And then I think my only upset, I think, of that round, unless maybe I could also see St. Paul's obviously beating Garden City, which it's a 4v5. That's really tough to say. But I think this 3-6 matchup, I think Oak Park, if they have Taven Vigilance, I think that Oak Park beats Kildone and East. So your final four would be, I'm going to say right now, the Vincent Massey Trojans, the Garden City Gophers, the Dakota Lancers, and the Oak Park Raiders. I think your final on March 18th at 8 p.m. is still going to be the Trojans and the Lancers. And then I'm going to have to take, as much as I'm a Dakota alum, I'm going to have to take the Trojans to win that one. They've been the best team in the province all year. So I'm going to quickly refresh Twitter just to see if I can get you that final in that 11 matchup. I still don't have that, so hopefully that can be added into the video later, or we can just put it at the bottom of the description. But it's time to move on. Now it's time for U Sports. So there'll be a little bit of blockage. I might go full screen just so you can see the whole bracket here. So here we are. We're going to start with the Canada West Basketball Championship. This was so good, hosted by the University of Manitoba. This was great basketball all week. We had one Cinderella, and I'm going to point them out right away. The UNBC Timberwolves shocked everybody and beat the UBC Thunderbirds, the 5 seed, before the tournament even started. In the preliminary quarterfinal, I think that was the playing games. Which was very surprising. Then they went on to beat the U of M Bisons and were actually leading the Victoria Vikes at halftime. They were up big on the Vikes, and obviously the Vikes ended up getting to the final, and as you can see, they won. But we'll continue the other side of the bracket here. Obviously, the University of Brandon Bobcats beat the Huskies in the playing game, and I don't think that game against the Vikes, if I remember correctly, was too competitive. But the University of Brandon, still a good season for them. They were one of the under the radar teams this year that actually did pretty well when they actually had some big games. So flipping to the other side, obviously the Alberta Golden Bears beat, as you can see, the Mount Royal Cougars. That game was a little bit closer than probably expected. I believe there were a couple big shots hit by Mikkel Jean and Adam Page. They made some big plays. And then again, the Fraser Valley Cascades upset the University of Regina Cougars by 12. So that was your other huge upset. You had the 12 and 13 seeds both advancing. So the 2 lowest seeds advanced out of their playing games. And then the University of Winnipeg just rolled over the Cascades. That game was not close. And the Calgary Dinos obviously beat the Alberta Golden Bears. And then a crazy game between the Dinos and the Westmen ensued for that place to get to nationals. So obviously, I'll explain it when we get there. But yeah, as long as you make the gold medal game in Canada West, you're making your way into this year's nationals, or as the format works. So obviously your final was the Victoria Vikes versus the University of Winnipeg Westmen. It was a fantastic game. The Vikes came out on top. The Westmen were leading early. It looked like the quote-unquote hometown team was going to get the win, but the Vikes, too much. Diego Mafia, Ronaldo Robinson, he had a fantastic game as well. Shout out to Robinson. He's been huge for the Vikes when they've needed him to be. So yeah, and then surprisingly, just again, shout out to UNBC Timberwolves, man. They beat the Calgary Dinos in the bronze medal game. So they finished third this year in Canada West, which is absolutely crazy. I can't believe that. They shocked everybody. But you know what? Hey, it's playoffs. Anything can happen. And look, they were the 11th seed and they ended up finishing in third place. So congrats to the UNBC Timberwolves. That is a huge accomplishment. Hopefully that's a building block to continue building for their program. So we're now going to move on to the Atlantic University Basketball Championships. So this was interesting because the two teams that you think would be in the final got to the final. Obviously, you see St. Mary's Huskies beat the UPAI Panthers by 4 in the quarterfinal game, and the Memorial Seahawks also beat the UNB Red Bombers. I believe that wasn't, I don't have the seeding, but if I do remember correctly, UNB was the higher seed, so that was an upset. But STFX, St. Francis Xavier, obviously still gets to the final, and Dalhousie takes care of St. Mary's Huskies. That game between Dalhousie and St. Francis was absolutely so good. It was high level talent. Obviously Malcolm Christie for the Dalhousie Tigers did his thing, and Dalhousie got the win, and they punched their ticket to nationals. Unfortunately, in AUS, you don't get a bid to, or I guess a place in nationals by just getting to the final of your conference, unfortunately. So St. Francis Xavier is the odd man out here. So a little unfortunate, but it is what it is. They packed the Scotiabank Arena, which was awesome to see. I believe they had 25,000 people over the 3 days that they held the tournament, which I think is awesome. And it just looked like it was so much fun. I'm hoping that this can kind of translate, and obviously we'll get to it when we get to OUA and seeing their crowds. Canada West brought some crowds. It wasn't as much as you'd hope, but hopefully this can be the building block now that they're doing these one place. Because I know last year, I don't know if it was for COVID or what, but they were going to kind of was the home team. That's who got to host the games and whatever. I like here's the one venue sort of thing, because, you know, it kind of reminds me of how they do it down in the States, and it feels a little more familiar. And I like it in terms of just holding an event over a couple days, and there's not really too much travel. Like if you lose, you go home. If you win, you stay, that sort of thing. But yeah, congrats to the Dalhousie Tigers. They're on to 2024 Nationals. All right, so RESQ we're now going to cover. So obviously, as you can see there, Laval is the host for Nationals, so their game against Concordia really didn't mean too much, but they kept actually the Stingers to a 10-point game, which is very surprising. And then UQAM, the Citadins, beat Bishops by 9, and then UQAM surprised everybody and beat Concordia in the final. So Concordia, who actually had a really good season, and I believe were in contention for, if not, they weren't, if I can't remember if they were in the top 10 towards the end of the year, but as far as I know, they were in contention for votes for the top 10 teams in U Sports, and they get bounced in their own conference final. So UQAM, congrats to the Citadins, because they're headed to the Nationals. Concordia, unfortunately, will not make it because they need to win their conference championship. So the only other conference that has teams that make it to the final, get an automatic bid, is the OUA. And yeah, this Wilson Cup tournament was absolutely nuts. Obviously, McMaster will start over there. They upset TMU in the playing games, which was nuts. Ontario Tech won their first ever game. They beat Lakehead, which I think was crazy. Ontario Tech, shout out to them. They had a fantastic season. Obviously, they were not very good last year. They completely turned it around this year and beat some really good teams. They were in contention for a lot of the season. And yeah, I was kind of rooting for them to go deep here in the Wilson Cup, but obviously, as we'll get to it, the run did end quickly. We'll continue by one reigning defense Walter Ravens, who weren't having that great of a season, but they still were winning some games here and there, and they were still competitive. But shout out to, obviously, Brock alum, founder of the Maple Minute, Josh Millican. Brock, obviously, well, as you'll see, they get quite far in this tournament, and Laurier beat York in the other playing game, which, as expected, Laurier was really good this year. So, flipping back to the other side of the bracket, so McMaster, having won the play-in, had to play the number 1 seed Queens Golden Gales, and Queens obviously won that matchup. And unfortunately, the Toronto Varsity Blues did end Ontario Tech's run in the OUA playoffs and their season, which still have to applaud the coaching staff and the players on Ontario Tech, because that's a fantastic turnaround to have like a 3-win season and then be competing in the OUA the following season for a top spot in your quote-unquote conference's division and in your conference tournament at the end of the year. The big stunner was the number 2 seed, and at one point this year was undefeated and the unanimous number 1 team in the country. The Brock Badgers beat the Ottawa GGs, and it was handedly as well. Just crazy. Brock, fantastic run here to, as you'll see, get a bid to this to the end of season tournament. And then the Western Mustangs ran all over the Golden Hawks, and they advanced to the semifinals. So again, just like Canada West, the semifinals are so important. As much as you want to win the Wilson Cup and you want to win Canada West, ultimately making the championship game just means that you're in the national tournament. And in the nationals, and obviously 2 really good games. Obviously, Brock won by 3. That was the first game. And then Queens had to go to overtime against the University of Toronto, and Queens came out on top. It was a fantastic game. Both of those games were so good. I watched both of them, and I hadn't watched OUA basketball really for most of the year. I've been kind of keeping an eye on it, but not too much. And I just can't believe that those 2 games came down to the wire. And then this game, the final between Queens and Brock, ended up being as advertised. As much as Brock was the 11th seed and Queens was the 1 seed, it came down to the wire, and I actually have it right here.
Bujoso for the lead. No! Rebound Kruger. The Gales have time to try and win this. Bet. Cole Sillis, 6 seconds left. It's hero time. Cole. Got it! It's a miracle by the local boy.
So, as you see my face there for a second, shout out Cole Sillis. Unreal. This video obviously went around. Shout out the Queens Gales play-by-play broadcaster. He was fantastic for all the games that I got to watch, all the Queens games. Just a fantastic call. Obviously, as he mentioned, the local Kingston, Ontario boy hits the game winner. His brother had been ejected earlier, Lucas Sillis, and Cole had the backpack. He was not having his best game, but he came up when it mattered most in the fourth quarter, and obviously he hit the game winner. And yeah, that was one of the best games that I've seen in quite a while. So yeah, shout out the Queens Gales, and yeah. So with that result, obviously that game, as much as you want to win the Wilson Cup if you're in the OUA, and they mentioned it multiple times on that broadcast if you got a chance to watch, the ultimate prize was gained in nationals. So realistically, that game, as much as you want, those players wanted, you see the Brock players, they were really upset. They wanted to win it. Obviously, you get all the way there as the 11th seed. You do all the hard work, and you were also winning for most of the game. Brock was playing better than Queens. Obviously, you lose on the buzzer beater in any game, it hurts. But in a game where you should have won it and for a championship, it does hurt. But the ultimate prize is this right here. So as you can see, and I didn't get a chance to shout him out before I showed all these brackets. Shout out Greg Fair on Twitter. These are all of his brackets, I believe, as far as I know. I haven't seen them anywhere else. Obviously, I've seen U Sports and OUA and AUS. They all posted their own versions of them, but some of them weren't all filled out. Greg has done a great job of filling them all out throughout as results were coming through. And then obviously U Sports posted their own, but it doesn't have seating on it, I do believe. And I thought this one looks cleaner because it obviously shows the consolation games that'll happen. So here are your top 8 teams. So obviously your Canada West, and for the back half of the season, number 1 team in the country, the University of Victoria Vikes, they get the 1 seed. They'll play, obviously, because Laval is the host, and they weren't really in too much conversation this year for most of the year in terms of best teams. They get the 8 seed, so Laval plays the host in the first game. Obviously, the other game on that side will be the Dalhousie Tigers and the Brock Badgers in that 4 versus 5. That should be a really good 4 versus 5 game. Then the 2-7 is the University of Queens versus the University of Winnipeg. So that should be an interesting game. Obviously, U of W was also kind of doing what Brock was doing, where they were winning for most of the game against Victoria, and then they unfortunately blew a lead. So that should be a good game against Queens. Just to see how Canada West really stacks up. A team in the Westmen who weren't super high. I think they were the 4 seed or the 5 seed in Canada West. So we'll have to see how they do against a really good OUA team in Queens. And then the 3 seed, I believe it's because they won RSEQ, UQAM, Les Citadins will play the wild card team, who get lucky because Queens would have been the wild card if Brock had, I believe it was, I can't remember who it was. I think there was one situation where I believe if Queen had lost to Toronto, they would have been the wild card team. But because Ottawa got to the final, the University of Ottawa GGs do get the 6 seed. I do think that they advance. So if you want predictions from me, obviously I think the Vikes advance. I think Brock beats Dalhousie. And then I think I'm going to go, as much as people might say it's bias, I think that the Westmen actually beat the Gales, and then they'll face off against the GGs in the second round. And I think it'll be a Vikes GGs final for the championship. And I think the Vikes do come out on top unless something crazy happens. Obviously, you can see the consolation that will happen in the middle. I believe that is on the Friday, Friday, and the consolation finals on the Saturday as the same day, or excuse me, not the same times, but the same day as the semifinal games, and then the Sunday will be the championship. So that is everything. Everybody's caught up on Manitoba Provincials, high school basketball, and U Sports. If you haven't caught any of that, you'll see that CBC Sports and CBC Gem will be broadcasting those games. Please go and watch. The basketball is so good. You need to tap in these players. Some of these players are Division I players coming back home to play. Some of them are just homegrown and have stayed here. The basketball is so good, and the product is so good. I can't stress that enough. Watching these games is like, it is the closest it's ever been to Division I basketball as it's ever been. Like, the talent level is so much higher than it used to be. It's just so good. You have to get if you get a chance, you have to watch, because the product is so good. The players are so good. The level of talent is so much higher than it's ever been. And you want to support your hometown or your home country as well. I know it's a smaller tournament with just 8 teams, and there's a consolation, which is a little bit different. But it's still so good. The basketball, like I said, is higher tier than it has been before. It's the closest it's ever been, I would say, personally, to Division I basketball. Some of these players do things that are just nuts. Some of these guys are going to end up going and playing pro this summer with the CBL. So that's something else to watch. Like obviously Diego Mafia should be back for the Vancouver Bandits. Jordan Chuente of the Brock Badgers should be back with the Niagara River Lions. I believe Ottawa had a player with the Blackjacks. Obviously, Cole Sillis should be, I would assume, back with the Blackjacks this year with the Ottawa Blackjacks. And yeah, there's a bunch of players on the Westman that were practice players for the Winnipeg Sea Bears. So, like you gotta, that's just a couple names. That's just a couple players. There's guys like Malcolm Christie for Dalhousie, who I'm a huge fan of and I think should be on the CBL roster as a U Sports roster player this upcoming season. Right? Like these guys, some of these guys are playing pro already and they're playing against other high-level pros and they get minutes. Like Diego doesn't just sit on the bench. Diego Mafia plays for the Bandits. Jordan Chuente played for the River Lions this past year, right? Like you even look at the Sea Bears, and I know they're not in nationals, but like Simon Hildebrandt, who was a main fixture of the Sea Bears roster. So I know that U Sports, you don't always catch it, and the marketing isn't always there, and they're doing their best. But this is my call to action. If you see this, go and watch U Sports basketball. I promise you, you will not regret it. Just rewatch the clip of Cole Sillis winning the Wilson Cup, and you will be hooked. Because I was already hooked before that, and I thought that was as best PR as you can get if you're U Sports and OUA. And obviously you see the crowds at Queens, and if you watch the Western game, it was packed there when Brock was playing Western, and Queens packed the house against U of T, and it's so good. I know that it's not as much passion, but you can get into it. If you're a CBL fan, then you should be a U Sports fan, because a lot of these guys get minutes during the CBL season, then go back to their school teams and they're the stars of their teams. So, it's as much as I can keep hammering the message, you got to watch U Sports basketball. I never really, until I got older, I never really gave it a chance. And then obviously now that I'm out of, I'm still in university, but I'm out of high school and stuff, I've gotten really attached to it and I love it so much. I've watched and kept up with it as much as I could. Same with NCAA basketball, obviously with March Madness coming, which we'll do a little preview hopefully next week of potential Canadians in March Madness. But yeah, like these are Canadians playing in our version of March Madness. Support these kids, watch the games, and then I'll hammer it during the summer and I'll hammer it into next year. Go to the games. These kids love big crowds and the basketball is good. It's like I said, it's the closest thing to Division I basketball we've seen in a long time in our own country, and you don't have to drive really anywhere for it. If you live somewhere near a school, it'll be good enough basketball. So with that being said, with that recap, I want to thank you all for watching. And yeah, I think next week we'll do some preview for March Madness and some selection committee stuff. Maybe we'll do a little bracket. Maybe if we've got potential slots already slotted in. I know some of the other conferences are getting into conference tournaments soon. We can kind of talk that sort of thing. Maybe we'll do a bracket later on. But yeah. But for now, please watch this upcoming weekend. If you get a chance, if you want to watch some high school hoops, Manitoba's got provincials happening starting this weekend. And then obviously U Sports Nationals is happening this weekend. So please go and watch. And yeah, this has been episode 7, the special edition episode. Hopefully not the last special edition episode for Canadian Basketball Weekly. As always, as your host, Elliot Russenholt, thank you for watching, and I will see you all next time. Peace.